The first thing Jeffrey noticed was the light, cold, fluorescent, and blinding. It cut through the fog in his mind like a knife. His eyelids felt heavy, his throat burned, and somewhere in the distance, monitors beeped in a rhythm that matched his racing heart. Blurred figures moved around him, dressed in surgical greens. Masks covered their faces. Gloved hands worked with frightening efficiency. Then a voice broke through the haze. "Mr. Jeffrey, I'm Dr. Millicent. I'll be your surgeon today." That voice, he knew that voice. His eyes struggled to focus on the woman standing over him. All he could see were her eyes above the surgical mask, calm, steady, familiar in a way that made his stomach drop. But 60 minutes ago, he didn't even know her name. 60 minutes ago, she was just some woman in scrubs he'd humiliated in front of a crowded restaurant. Now, she held his life in her hands. How did a power lunch turn into a fight for survival, and why does his surgeon look so familiar? If you've ever wondered how one moment of cruelty can change everything, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to get wild. Let's rewind 60 minutes earlier. Jeffrey Harrington wasn't a bad person. At least, that's what he told himself every morning while adjusting his $1,500 tie in the mirror of his corner office on the 42nd floor. He was just focused, driven. In his world, there were winners and losers, and he'd clawed his way to the top by being ruthless when it mattered. That Wednesday afternoon, he sat at Le Jardin Bistro, the kind of place where reservations required a 3-week wait and marble tables gleamed under crystal chandeliers. His Italian leather shoes tapped impatiently against the polished floor as he checked his Rolex for the 4th time in 10 minutes. 2:47 p.m. His client was late. The morning had already been a disaster. His assistant had printed the wrong contract twice. Traffic on the interstate had been a parking lot thanks to some idiot who didn't know how to merge. And when he'd finally arrived at Le Jardin, the waiter had brought sparkling water instead of still. Sparkling, like he was some tourist who didn't know the difference. Jeffrey took a breath and reminded himself why he was here. Marcus Chen, real estate developer, worth somewhere north of $50 million. One signature on the contract sitting in Jeffrey's briefcase, and he'd be looking at a commission that would cover his beach house in the Hamptons, the one he'd been eyeing for 2 years. This meeting could make his year, maybe his career. He glanced at his phone, 3 missed calls from his assistant, probably panicking about something meaningless. He sent her a text, "Handle it, I'm busy." In Jeffrey's world, people fell into 2 categories, useful or obstacles. His assistant was useful when she didn't mess up. The waiter was an obstacle who'd just been demoted to invisible. And Marcus was the golden ticket. Another glance at his watch, 2:51 p.m. Where the hell was Marcus? Jeffrey flagged down the waiter with an impatient snap of his fingers. Another water, still, not sparkling. You'd think that would be simple enough. The waiter nodded quickly and disappeared, probably relieved to get away from Jeffrey's table. Here's the thing about Jeffrey, he wasn't always like this. 10 years ago, fresh out of law school, he'd been idealistic. He'd wanted to help people make a difference. But then he'd learned the hard way that nice guys finish last. His first firm had passed him over for partner twice, promoting men who were less qualified but better at playing politics. So Jeffrey changed. He became harder, sharper. He stopped caring what people thought and started caring only about results. And it worked. Within 5 years, he'd made partner at a top firm. Within 8, he was pulling in 7 figures annually. His ex-wife said he'd lost himself. Jeffrey said he'd found himself. The truth, as always, was probably somewhere in the middle. But none of that would matter in about 45 minutes. Jeffrey was scrolling through emails on his phone when he noticed her, a woman in navy blue scrubs weaving between the tables. She looked out of place among the business suits and designer dresses, like a splash of reality in a carefully curated fantasy. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and there were faint shadows under her eyes, the kind that came from too many double shifts and not enough sleep. She moved with the purposeful exhaustion of someone who'd been on her feet for hours and still had hours to go. She stopped at his table. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was polite, almost apologetic. "I hate to interrupt, but your SUV is blocking the staff entrance. I need to get to the hospital. My shift starts in 20 minutes. Jeffrey didn't even look up from his phone. The valet parked it. "I know, sir, but it's blocking the employee access, if you could just." Now he looked up, and his expression said everything before his mouth did. Annoyance, disbelief, the audacity of this woman interrupting his lunch. "Do I look like a valet to you?" She blinked. "No, sir, I just need you to ask them to move." "I'm in the middle of something." He gestured vaguely at his table as if the empty chair across from him and the untouched bread basket constituted a major business crisis. "Handle it yourself." A few nearby diners had started to notice. The woman took a breath, maintaining her composure in a way that suggested she'd dealt with difficult people before, probably dealt with them every day. "I understand you're busy, but this will only take a moment." And that's when something inside Jeffrey snapped. Maybe it was the morning from hell. Maybe it was Marcus being late. Maybe it was years of entitled people thinking the world revolved around them finally catching up to him in the worst possible way. "Listen, sweetheart." The word dripped with condescension. "I don't know what they pay you to empty bedpans, but my time is worth $800 an hour, so unless you're dying, you can wait." The restaurant went silent. It was the kind of silence that feels physical, like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Silverware stopped clinking mid-bite. Conversations died on people's lips. Even the waiter, halfway across the dining room, froze with a tray of drinks. Every eye in La Jardin turned to Jeffrey's table. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't storm off in righteous anger. Instead, she just looked at him, really looked at him like she was seeing something he couldn't see himself. Then she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile or an angry smile. It was something else entirely, sad, knowing, and deeply unsettling. "Don't rush, Jeffrey." She said his name like she already knew it, like she'd known it all along. "I have a feeling our next appointment is going to be much longer anyway." She turned to the valet stand near the entrance and calmly handed her keys to the attendant. "You can park it wherever there's space. I'll walk from there." Then she left, didn't look back, didn't make a scene, just walked out into the afternoon sunlight and disappeared around the corner. Jeffrey stared at the door for a moment, his heart beating strangely fast. What the hell did that mean? Our next appointment. He shook it off and returned to his phone. Probably just some weird threat. People said stupid things when they were angry. The restaurant slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed, forks scraped plates, the world kept turning. But something felt off. Something felt very, very wrong. Now, before we go any further, have you ever said something you instantly regretted? Drop a comment below. And if you're enjoying this story, smash that like button. Marcus Chen arrived 7 minutes later, all apologies and firm handshakes. Under normal circumstances, Jeffrey would have been in his element, confident, charming, closing deals with the precision of a surgeon. But today wasn't normal. Jeffrey heard himself going through the motions, talking about property values, zoning regulations, projected returns. But his mind kept circling back to that woman's face, that smile, those words. Our next appointment is going to be much longer anyway. What the hell did that mean? Marcus was saying something about tax implications, but Jeffrey couldn't focus. Was it a threat? Some kind of veiled legal action? Could she actually sue him for? What, being rude? No, that was ridiculous. Unless she recorded it. His stomach dropped. What if she'd recorded the whole thing on her phone? What if it ended up on social media? Some viral video of a corporate lawyer screaming at a healthcare worker. his firm would have his head. "Jeffrey, you still with me?" He snapped back to reality. Marcus was looking at him with concern, or was it suspicion? "Yes, sorry, long morning." Jeffrey forced a smile and fumbled for his briefcase. "The contract is here somewhere." He was rattling, actually rattling. He never rattled. He found the contract but nearly knocked over his water glass in the process. Marcus raised an eyebrow but said nothing. They went through the details, but Jeffrey's usual razor-sharp attention was gone. He mixed up figures, had to correct himself twice, and completely forgot to mention the clause about early termination penalties. The woman he'd normally be, the one who could negotiate a hostile takeover while hungover, had left the building. After 30 agonizing minutes, Marcus stood up. "I'll have my people look this over. We'll be in touch." That was corporate speak for "this meeting was a disaster, and I'm having second thoughts." Jeffrey knew it. He'd just blown the biggest deal of his year because he couldn't stop thinking about some woman in scrubs. He threw 320s on the table without waiting for the check and stormed toward the exit. His SUV was right where he'd left it. No slashed tires, no keyed paint. See, nothing to worry about. She was just some bitter nobody making empty threats. But as he climbed behind the wheel, his hands were shaking. He pulled out of the parking lot faster than necessary, his foot heavy on the accelerator. The afternoon sun glared through the windshield and he fumbled for his sunglasses. His mind was a hurricane of anger and unease. She'd humiliated him, made him look like a fool in front of an entire restaurant, made him lose his edge with Marcus. Who did she think she was? The light ahead turned yellow. Jeffrey gunned it. His phone rang, the sound blaring through his Bluetooth speakers. His assistant's name flashed on the dashboard display. "What?" he snapped. "Mr. Harrington, I'm so sorry to bother you, but the Hendricks deposition got moved to Friday, and I need to know if..." "Friday's fine, is that it?" "Well, also the caterer for the firm party needs to know about dietary restrictions." "I don't care about the damn caterer." Jeffrey was weaving through traffic now, cutting off a sedan to make a right turn. Horns blared behind him. "Handle it yourself. That's what I pay you for." "But Mr. Harrington..." "I said handle it." He was about to disconnect when he saw it. The intersection ahead, the construction site, the crane. And then he heard it. A sound like thunder, like the world cracking open. Metal screaming against metal. Time slowed down in the way it only does when your brain knows you're about to die. Jeffrey saw the construction crane's arm swinging out over the intersection, saw the massive steel beam dangling from cables that were supposed to be secure, but suddenly, catastrophically, weren't. He saw the beam falling. His foot slammed on the brake, but physics didn't care about his panic. The SUV, his beautiful, luxurious $70,000 SUV that had been too important to move an hour ago, kept sliding forward on momentum and fear. The world became sound and chaos. The beam hit the hood first, and the impact was like a bomb going off. Metal crushed metal with a sound that Jeffrey felt in his bones. The windshield exploded inward, showering him with glass that glittered like ice in the sunlight. The airbag deployed, punching him in the face with the force of a sledgehammer. Then the real weight came down. The steel beam, thousands of pounds of industrial construction material, collapsed across the front of the SUV, driving it down, down, down. The frame buckled. The dashboard crumpled inward like aluminum foil in a fist. Jeffrey's legs were beneath that dashboard. The pain arrived a second later, and it was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Not the clean pain of a broken bone or the sharp pain of a cut. This was something primal and wrong. The pain of a body being crushed, of bones shattering, of flesh trapped between immovable objects. He screamed. The sound that came out of his throat wasn't human. It was animal terror and agony mixed together. The smell hit him next. gasoline leaking from somewhere beneath the hood, motor oil, the acrid chemical stench of deployed airbags, and underneath it all the metallic copper smell of his own blood. He could taste it too, blood in his mouth from where his teeth had cut his lip, or maybe it was worse than that. He couldn't tell, couldn't think past the pain. His vision blurred, everything tilted sideways. Somewhere outside his metal prison he heard voices, shouting, running footsteps. "Oh my God! Someone call 911. Don't move him, don't touch anything." Faces appeared at the shattered window, strangers' faces, pale with shock. A woman was crying. A man was on his phone, his voice shaking as he gave the address to emergency dispatch. Jeffrey tried to speak, but only a wet gurgling sound came out. His chest felt tight. Breathing was suddenly hard, like trying to inhale through a straw. In the distance, sirens, growing louder. Time lost meaning. Seconds could have been minutes. Minutes could have been hours. Jeffrey drifted in and out of consciousness like a radio station fading in and out of range. He became aware of new sounds, the mechanical grinding of hydraulic tools, the sharp smell of cutting metal, voices closer now, professional and urgent. "We need to stabilize the beam before we can extract him. BP is dropping. Get the IV started now. Sir, can you hear me? Stay with us." Pain flared white-hot as they moved something near his legs, and Jeffrey's scream echoed inside the crushed cabin. Everything went dark for a moment, then swam back into terrible clarity. A paramedic's face appeared in his field of vision, young, focused, wearing blue gloves already stained red. "We're going to get you out of here, sir. We're taking you to St. Catherine's. Just hang on." St. Catherine's. Through the haze of pain and shock, one thought cut through Jeffrey's mind with terrible clarity. That's where she worked, that woman, the one in scrubs. Our next appointment is going to be much longer anyway. She'd known, somehow impossibly she'd known. The irony wasn't lost on him, even as consciousness slipped away like water through his fingers. The SUV that had been too important to move, the vehicle that represented everything about who he was, had become his prison, his punishment. His last coherent thought before the darkness took him, please, God, anyone but her. But God, it seemed, wasn't taking requests today. Jeffrey woke to white. White ceiling tiles, white walls, white sheets pulled up to his chest, the kind of sterile, oppressive white that could only mean one thing: hospital. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed faintly, each one a small sun burning into his retinas. He tried to turn his head, but even that simple movement sent spikes of pain through his neck and shoulders. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm beside him. An IV line snaked from his arm to a bag of clear fluid hanging on a metal pole. The smell of antiseptic and industrial cleaning solution filled his nostrils, that particular hospital smell that meant sickness and suffering and desperation. He tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper wrapped around broken glass, a raw, burning sensation that made him gag. Something had been down his throat, a breathing tube, he realized dimly. They'd intubated him. A nurse appeared at his bedside, middle-aged, kind eyes, pink scrubs. She checked something on one of the monitors and made a note on a tablet. "Welcome back, Mr. Harrington." Her voice was professional but warm. "You're at St. Catherine's Medical Center. You were in an accident. Try not to talk. Your throat will be sore for a while." Jeffrey's mind was still foggy, struggling to piece together reality. The restaurant, the woman, the crane, the crushing weight. His legs. He tried to move them. Nothing. Panic detonated in his chest like a hand grenade. He tried again, commanded his legs to move, to bend, to do anything. But there was nothing, not pain, not numbness, just nothing, an absence where sensation should be. His eyes went wide. His heart rate monitor began beeping faster, louder, more insistent. The nurse put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Harrington, you need to stay calm." The door opened, and another figure entered. A doctor this time, older, gray at the temples, wearing the long white coat that meant authority. He pulled up Jeffrey's chart on a tablet and studied it with the detached efficiency of someone who delivered bad news 1,000 times before. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Dr. Patterson. You sustained severe crush injuries to both legs in the accident. There's significant damage to bone, muscle, and vascular tissue." He spoke clinically, without emotion. "We're prepping you for emergency surgery right now. The goal is to save as much function as possible, but I won't lie to you, it's going to be complicated." Jeffrey managed to croak out a single word: "Who?" Dr. Patterson looked up from the tablet. "Who's performing the surgery?" "Dr. Millicent. She's the best trauma surgeon we have, one of the best in the state, actually. You're very fortunate she's on shift today. She's scrubbing in now." The heart rate monitor went berserk. Beep, 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 beep. Jeffrey tried to sit up, tried to protest, but his body wouldn't cooperate. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "No," the word came out as barely a whisper. "Someone else, anyone." The nurse was at his side immediately, her hand firm on his chest, keeping him down. "Sir, you need to calm down. Your blood pressure is spiking. Dr. Millicent has saved hundreds of lives. You're in excellent hands." Excellent hands. The same hands he dismissed 2 hours ago. The same hands that belonged to the woman he'd humiliated in front of a crowded restaurant. The woman whose time wasn't worth as much as his. The woman who'd promised him a longer appointment. The irony is almost too perfect, right? If you're as hooked as I am, go ahead and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to comment your thoughts. They wheeled him into the operating room on a gurney that rattled with every bump in the corridor. The ceiling tiles passed overhead in a blur of white and fluorescent light. Jeffrey's world had shrunk to this, helpless, horizontal, being pushed toward a fate he couldn't control. The ore was cold, brutally cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and reminded you that you were meat on a table, waiting to be cut open. Surgical lights hung above him like mechanical suns, their brightness absolute and unforgiving. Monitors beeped and hummed. Stainless steel instruments gleamed on nearby trays, scalpels, clamps, saws. Jeffrey tried not to think about what they were for. The surgical team moved around him with practiced efficiency. Nurses in blue scrubs adjusted IV lines and checked monitors. Someone positioned his arms on padded boards, strapping them down gently but firmly. He was being prepared, arranged, made ready for what came next. The anesthesiologist appeared at his side, a young man with kind eyes above a surgical mask. "Mr. Harrington, I'm going to start your anesthesia now. You'll feel a little lightheaded and then you'll drift off to sleep. Just relax." A warmth spread through Jeffrey's arm from the IV line. The edges of his vision began to soften, the bright lights gaining halos that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Then the door opened. She entered like she belonged there, because she did. Navy scrubs had been replaced by surgical greens. A mask covered the lower half of her face. A surgical cap hid her hair. But those eyes. God, those eyes. He'd recognize them anywhere. They were the same eyes that had looked at him across a restaurant table 2 hours ago. The same eyes that had seen through his arrogance and his cruelty and recognized him for exactly what he was. Dr. Millicent walked to the surgical sink, methodically scrubbing her hands and forearms with the ritualistic precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. She dried off, and a nurse helped her into sterile gloves that snapped against her wrists. She approached the table, picked up his chart from a nearby stand, reviewed it with the same calm professionalism she'd shown when asking him to move his car. Then she looked down at him. Recognition flickered in her gaze, brief, unmistakable. She knew who he was. Of course she knew. "Mr. Jeffrey," she said, her voice steady and clear through the mask. "I'm Dr. Millicent. I'll be performing your surgery today." Through the oxygen mask, through the fog of pre-anesthesia, Jeffrey tried to speak. "Please." The word came out slurred, desperate. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw something there. Not anger, not satisfaction, something more complicated, sadness maybe, or disappointment that anyone could be so cruel to a stranger. "Sir, I need you to stay calm." Her voice remained professional, controlled. "We're going to do everything we can to save your legs." Everything we can, not a promise, not a guarantee, just an attempt. The difference between those words felt enormous. Jeffrey's mind, even dulled by drugs, raced with terrible thoughts. Was she going to hurt him? Let him suffer more than necessary? Make a mistake that wasn't quite a mistake? This was his karma, wasn't it? This was the universe's way of teaching him a lesson. Dr. Millicent seemed to read his fear. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to something that only he could hear. "I took an oath to do no harm, Mr. Jeffrey. That oath doesn't have exceptions for people who are rude to me. It doesn't have exceptions for people who humiliate healthcare workers in restaurants. It doesn't have exceptions at all." She paused, and in that pause, he heard his own heart monitor beeping faster. "Though I imagine," she continued quietly, "you'll have plenty of time to think about how you treat people during recovery." The anesthesiologist's voice came from somewhere far away. "Count backwards from 10, Mr. Jeffrey." 10. Jeffrey's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Millicent positioned herself at the surgical field, instruments in hand. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was her eyes above that mask, professional, competent, and utterly in control. He was completely at her mercy. And mercy, he was learning, had to be earned. Jeffrey woke to pain, but it was a different kind of pain, manageable, controlled, the kind that meant he was alive and healing. His legs were there. He could see them beneath the white hospital blanket, both of them encased in casts from hip to ankle, elevated on pillows, still part of his body. Relief crashed over him so intensely that tears pricked his eyes. The surgery had taken 6 hours, a nurse told him. 6 hours of Dr. Millicent carefully reconstructing what the accident had destroyed, repairing torn blood vessels, setting shattered bones, salvaging muscle tissue that had been crushed but not killed. She'd saved him, actually saved him. It was late afternoon when Dr. Millicent appeared during rounds. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from spending half a day in an operating room fighting to preserve someone's future. But her movements were still precise, her voice still clear and professional. She pulled up his chart on a tablet, reviewed his vitals, checked the surgical sites with careful hands. "The surgery went well, Mr. Jeffrey," she said, making notes. "We were able to save both legs. You'll need extensive physical therapy. We're looking at 6 to 8 months of rehabilitation, possibly longer. But with work, you should regain most of your mobility." Jeffrey's throat tightened. The words came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Dr. Millicent, I'm sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. I was—" He paused, searching for words that could possibly be adequate. "I was wrong, completely wrong, and I'm so sorry." For the first time since he'd met her, Dr. Millicent's professional mask slipped just slightly. Not into anger or satisfaction, but into something more human. She set down the tablet and looked at him, really looked at him. "I appreciate that, Mr. Jeffrey, I do." Her voice was gentle but firm. "But I didn't save your legs for an apology. I didn't do it to make you feel guilty or to prove a point or to teach you a lesson." She paused, letting that sink in. "I did it because it's my job, because every person who comes through those doors deserves my best, whether they've earned it or not, whether they're kind or cruel, whether they see me as a human being or an obstacle in their way." Jeffrey felt something crack inside his chest, not physically, something deeper. Dr. Millicent picked up her tablet, preparing to move on to her next patient. But before she left, she turned back to him one more time. The question is, Mr. Jeffrey, what will you do with this second chance? He opened his mouth, but no answer came. What could he say? What was the right answer to a question like that? Dr. Millicent didn't wait for a response. She simply nodded, as if she'd expected his silence, and walked toward the door. Just before she left, she spoke one final time without looking back. I hope the next time someone needs your help, you remember this moment. Then she was gone, leaving Jeffrey alone with his casted legs and his shattered certainty about who he was. Life has a way of teaching us lessons we never asked for, in classrooms we never wanted to enter. Jeffrey's story is a cautionary tale about arrogance, about the dangerous belief that our time, our concerns, our very existence matters more than anyone else's. He learned, in the most brutal way possible, that the universe doesn't care about your corner office or your expensive SUV or your $800 hourly rate. But this is also a story about grace. Because here's what's remarkable: Dr. Millicent could have gloated. She could have made him suffer just a little bit more, could have done the bare minimum and walked away with a clear conscience. No one would have blamed her. Jeffrey had humiliated her, dismissed her, treated her like she was less than human. Instead, she spent 6 hours saving his legs. She gave him her best because that's who she was, not because of who he was. That's the real lesson here. That's what separates people like Dr. Millicent from people like Jeffrey used to be. We live in a world where everyone is fighting battles we know nothing about. The woman in scrubs rushing to her shift might be the surgeon who saves your life. The janitor cleaning your office might be putting 3 kids through college. The barista making your coffee might be a published poet. The person you're dismissing as an obstacle might be the exact person you need when everything falls apart. We never really know who we're talking to. We never know whose path we're crossing. We never know when that moment of casual cruelty might come back to haunt us, or when an act of simple kindness might change everything. Jeffrey got a second chance. Not everyone does. The question isn't whether he deserved that second chance. The question is what he'll do with it. Will he become someone different? Will he remember Dr. Millicent's eyes above that surgical mask? Will he remember what it felt like to be completely powerless, completely dependent on the grace of someone he'd wronged? We'll never know, but you can make a different choice. In a world where you can be anything, choose kindness. Not because it might benefit you later, though it might. Not because it's good karma, though it is. Choose kindness because cruelty always comes with a price. And you never know when the bill comes due. If this story made you think twice about how you treat people, I've done my job. Subscribe to Gilded Justice Stories for more real-life tales that'll change how you see the world. Drop a comment telling me what Jeffrey should do next. And remember, be kind out there. You never know who's watching.